So today I'm here with a great idea for a video, or perhaps a terrible one. I decided to finally do a video addressing all of the negative and hate comments I've gotten on my channel. Now, for the most part, if someone is here to have a good conversation, even if they are critical of me, I do try to respond and really, again, take criticism when it is due. Sometimes the messages I get are just very bigoted, rude, and clearly the person is trying to troll me and not actually start a good conversation. So there are times where I don't necessarily answer them. I often leave them up just so other people can see what's going on rather than have my channel be overly censored. But anyway, I thought it would be great, rather than respond directly to some of those comments, but to have an open forum video where I talk about some of these comments I get on a regular basis and address why I do what I do, try to explain myself, and just honestly point out some of my failures as well. So if that sounds interesting, if that sounds fun, let's turn up the heat and get started. All right, let's start with one of the most common ones I get, and that is specifically on my science fiction content. I get a lot of comments, especially when I do a top 10 list, that I'm listing and reading too many men. And I do acknowledge that if I look at my stats when it comes especially to sci-fi, I do read more men than women. There's a variety of reasons that I'm going to talk about here, whether they are correct or not, but definitely there are more men getting published in science fiction. They're more easily accessible, they're more well-known, more prolific, etc. in at least traditional publishing. And so I do find myself just naturally picking up more men. I have to almost go out of my way at times to reach out and find and target female science fiction authors, because they're not as easily readily available at my fingertips when people are giving me recommendations for a subgenre, etc. So I do find myself picking out more male-centric books, and that is reflective in some of my top 10 lists if you look back at things I've done before. And I'm aware of it, and it's always the tricky part when I make a top 10 list, that I want to be authentic to the books that I honestly consider to be my favorites in whatever ranking I'm doing. But I'm also aware of those biases. So I know for other publications like Book Riot, the online forum, they have certain mandates about always making sure that any list they do is very diverse. However, I don't want to redistribute or mislead or show books to be my favorite in a way that they aren't in order to make my stats look better. So I do admit I want to read more women. I'm actively trying to do that on a regular basis, and specifically what I'm missing is that I'm trying to tip my stats naturally to have more women in my top 10 sci-fi books of all time, but again, doing a way that is very authentic, not kind of forcing or putting in a token woman just to make my list look more balanced, but instead really finding female authors that speak to me. And I am definitely seeing that as time goes on, but especially if you look back at my older top 10 sci-fi videos, there's at least one of them that is all male, and I definitely got some hate on that video, and I don't entirely blame people for pointing that out, because especially as a female reviewer, you would think that I would be looking and trying to represent the female authors out there, because again, there is an imbalance. It's the fact that there are more men getting published, more men getting higher publication and publicity and all of that, and ideally I want to help to balance the playing field there. Now, along a similar note, I also get comments saying that I read too many women. Now, it is funny because I've had certain videos where I've gotten the criticism that I read too many men, and I've gotten other comments on the exact same video saying that I read too many women, and that is confusing. There was one video, I think it was a top 10, where I counted there was 4 women on that video, so 6 men, 4 women, and I had a comment saying that I was reading way too many women, and they just wanted to know who my favorite male authors were because clearly I liked women more, something like that. And I found it interesting that it wasn't even a 50-50 split, and there was still too many women in that video. Now, if you look at my stats again, it does tend to break down by genre, so when it comes to things like horror, I do read and gravitate more towards female voices, and I think it again comes down to the fact that they write more female-centric narratives that speak to me in a way that some stories of a coming of age of, say, a boy may not necessarily speak to me on that same level. Not to say that everything is targeted on gender divides, but definitely I find myself in some places finding a women's voice to speak to me in a way that a man's voice doesn't, and then there's other genres, say like science fiction, where I'll admit that a lot of the stories that men tend to get published in science fiction tend to lean more into the hard science fiction that I'm looking for, where I find that when women write science fiction, or at least when women get published in science fiction, it's often more for softer science stories that have perhaps more romance and lean into, again, the softer sciences and more of the character-driven relationships that I'm not necessarily looking for when I pick up a sci-fi book. But when I'm looking for a horror book, a thriller, etc., I want that female voice. I want to experience the world through their their lens. And so it's interesting how in some ways I'm reading too many men and in some ways I'm reading too many women. I don't know how I'm supposed to please everyone there. I do just think it's funny that I get both criticisms on my channel on a very regular basis. Now, rolling off the last comments, I want to move on to something related to it, talking more about gender divides. And this comes from the fact that I've gotten several comments, not just one, but several comments on different videos with different usernames saying, oh my goodness, women are destroying science fiction. And specifically, these comments usually come when I'm reviewing something that is a more modern new release that is written by a female author in the science fiction genre. And usually they're doing something perhaps a bit more out of the box, a bit more diverse, and again, perhaps bringing in some of those softer ideas of different representation and characters and all of that. And you get someone or multiple someones on that video saying, I just hate when women write science fiction, or specifically, like I said, they will use the word destroy science fiction, which sounds so incredible. I imagine myself as like Godzilla stomping around and wrecking the science fiction genre, which is, I don't know, kind of fun, but not the point. Anyway, I just find it interesting, and by interesting I mean pretty sad, that there is this ongoing narrative that clearly is very pervasive in the internet that science fiction would be better if women just stayed out of it, which is again such a shame because I've come to really love this genre as an adult, and I didn't read much of it as a kid or as a teenager because it did seem like more of a boys club. And now that I've read it, I'm so grateful I'm in it. But it's hard when you know that there's gatekeepers out there who just want me to get out and stay out, and me and the female authors out there should just go away from the genre. And jumping off of that, I did have one other comment about females that I wanted to mention. I only got that one single comment, but it was so specific that it's really stuck in my head, even though it's been years since I got that left on a video. And that is the fact that this individual noticed that on the video I was talking about, I had, I guess, read several male authors, and I don't know if I had any female science fiction authors in that video. And so in the comments they said, hey, I noticed that you only seem to read male authors. Is that because our brains are bigger and we're smarter and therefore write better stories? I don't believe I actually responded to the comment. It was just so stupid. And I wasn't even offended almost because it was so bizarre. I just kind of felt badly for this individual. I worried for their upbringing and education if this was the conclusion they were coming to. I dearly hope they were just trolling me, but again, I can't help but wonder after all of these years if they honestly truly believe that, and I just wonder what biology teacher in school failed them so badly that they came to that conclusion as an adult. So again, it's just kind of sad, especially as that female reader, when you hear those ideas and you realize that these are your fellow science fiction readers. But I like to think that these are the exceptions because online I've met so many welcoming people in the science fiction community, especially those that are perhaps a bit older, male, and have been reading science fiction for years. And in fact, they have been very welcoming as I have stumbled through the classics and slowly caught myself up with all of these great science fiction books. So again, I'm talking about the outliers. Most of the comments I get in my videos are thankfully very kind and supportive. And I also have gotten several comments, especially in the last couple years, saying that I talk too fast in videos. And this is something that I do understand kind of where it's coming from. I've looked back at older videos I've done and I definitely used to talk slower. I think the fact that I've sped up has to do with two things. One, the fact that I'm more comfortable on camera. The longer I do this, the easier it is for me to just talk off the cuff very quickly without having to think as much about what I'm about to say. And the other thing too is the fact that I'm often rushing to try to film something before my son gets home, before I have a deadline. There's always something ticking that means that I have a cutoff point for my video filming. And so because of that, when I have that idea in my head, I will talk faster in order to rush and get everything I want to say out before the video is done. Thankfully for YouTube, they do allow you to speed up or slow down videos. So if you haven't looked, there is a setting in YouTube in the settings that allows you to change that. So feel free to do that for me. Slow me down, speed me up, whatever you like. What I do find funny though, is I of course get comments saying that I talk too fast in videos, but I also have comments in other videos saying that I talk too slowly, which is fine. Again, in my older videos, I did talk slower, but what I find funny is when I get the same criticisms, or both criticisms rather, in the same video. So if one person is saying I'm talk too fast and one person says I talk too slow, I'm basically doomed because I seriously, literally cannot please them all. So let me know, do you speed me up or do you slow me down? Or are you one of those 1.0 speeds? Because I actually have never sped up or slowed down a YouTube video. I know, I'm old school, right? Next is a comment I have gotten very regularly on my channel. Particularly, there is one account who loves to drop this comment on all of my videos. And that is the fact that I recommend the same books too often. Now, this is a comment that I actually think is valid to a degree, which I think is part of the reason that it always always bothers me when it comes up, because I am someone who is trying to be mindful of the fact that with books, with recommendation videos, you are trying ideally to bring people new recommendations that they haven't read before. So you're trying to curate different lists and create different interests and recommendations for things that are underhyped and so forth. However, despite how much I read, which is again over 300 books a year, despite that, I still find myself struggling to not over-recommend certain books. There's a few reasons this comes up. So I have certain books that I adore that happen to fit within lots of different subgenres and topics and so forth. And so it's really hard for me not to include them in certain videos. And so I often find myself trying to decide whether to include them or not. And if I don't include them, everyone's saying, hey, where is this really popular book you like? Why didn't you mention it? And so it's always that idea of being mindful as a creator that you don't want to be tired, you don't want to be too repetitive. But even though I read hundreds of books a year, I don't love everything I read, and not everything deserves a second mention in a recommendation video. So when it comes to, say, recommending my favorite modern science fiction books, I don't want to be recommending things that I found just okay. I don't want to be recommending something that was a 2-star read for me. I want to genuinely recommend the stuff that I love. But if I love a book, then you might also see it in a top 10 list, it might show up in another one. And so because of that, it's very easy to get repetitive. So it's something I'm always working on, I'm always reevaluating. And it's kind of nice now to be doing more discussion-based videos to separate out my recommendation videos, so I'm not doing them back to back to back, because it is too easy, without thinking about it, to end up talking about the same book multiple times and possibly even talking about the same book in the same month. And I try hard not to do that, but again, I know I'm not perfect, I know I need to keep working on it, but it's hard not to talk about my favorites and to always be coming up with new books that no one has ever heard of. If you watch my channel regularly, you'll notice that I tend to talk about books that I love, and I try to do it in a nuanced, diverse way to mix it up, but it's hard, and I would love to hear from other creators. What is your strategy for not getting repetitive with your recommendations? All right, the next one is perhaps a valid point and kind of a funny point because it just speaks to myself as a creator, but I've gotten criticisms on videos where the person will point out that I will give a trigger warning for something in a book's content, perhaps harm to animals, and then in the same video I will gush about something really horrific. So I will say how much I love this serial killer and how gruesome this one scene is in the book, and the person will say, what is wrong with you? Why would you bother giving a trigger warning for something and then go off and gush about this ultra violent scene or whatever the thing is that caught my attention within a story? So I will like to separate the fact that I think content warnings or trigger warnings are important for those that need them and seek them out. And so I will do my best, which I know I'm not great at, but I will try to warn people when something might be off-putting or really causing emotional harm, etc. However, just because something is a trigger for someone else doesn't mean it is for me. And so you will see me gush about books that are very triggering to someone else. So I always want to keep that separation and respect where someone is coming from, but I also want to be authentic to my reading experience. Honestly, in general, I get a lot of comments that just are like, what's wrong with you? How can you like this book? How can you gush about this disgusting thing on the internet? And it definitely makes me sit back for a minute and think, am I going to get myself in trouble gushing about this terrible serial killer fiction story? And hopefully most people take me with a grain of salt and know that I'm hopefully a good-hearted person and just have some really strange taste in books. Next, I want to address something that comes up quite often on my channel, and that is the fact that people get really bothered by the fact that I tend to use they as a general pronoun that is gender neutral rather than saying he or she when I'm talking about certain characters or authors. Now, I realize that some people are making this criticism because they are homophobic or transphobic, and I don't even want to humor those with a response. So clearly, if I can tell that they're saying it with that meaning behind it, I'm not even just going to entertain that. However, there are those that have commented and they strictly are saying that is not proper grammar. And I have checked online on the APA website, and from my understanding, unless it has very recently changed after filming this, but it says that in modern English, it is appropriate to use they as a replacement for he, she if you do not want or do not know the gender of the individual you are describing. And so this is something I've come to use in my daily life, in my day job, because I'm not a YouTuber as a full-time job by any means. I have to make a lot of cold calls, and so that means I'm often calling people who I don't know their gender before I call them. For example, I'm often calling someone who is named Jesse or Devin or Brett, and I have met individuals where that name refers to a woman or a man. And if I guess on the phone, I always guess wrong. So I've just gotten in the habit of saying, hey, is Brett available? Are they in? And so because of that, I've gotten in that habit of saying it that way. And so that is extended into my book reviewing. And quite frankly, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, again, when I'm talking quickly on camera, I don't want to have to stop and think for a moment and go, oh, is that author, are they male? Are they female? What does that acronym stand for? I don't want to be flipping through to find a picture of them on the back of the book or having to stop and Google. So if I can't think of it in that second that I'm talking about the book, even if I know, if I thought about it for a minute, obviously I know that Bret Easton Ellis is a man, but when I hear the word Bret, I don't immediately think male anymore because I know so many female Brets. So I've just gotten the habit of saying they. And so because of that, I've gotten a lot of criticisms. At one point I referenced Margaret Atwood and said they rather than she, and someone was really upset about that. Or like I said, I've used Bret Easton Ellis and I know that I've said they before, and people get really upset and say that I'm offending him by using his wrong pronouns. And I will say, first of all, I don't think Margaret Atwood or Bret Easton Ellis are watching my videos. If they are, hello, but I don't think you're here. And so I would just argue that, you know, again, I don't think there's anything offensive. I know there's nothing offensive about using a gender neutral pronoun. And if someone referred to me as a they, I would be pleased by that. Because again, it shows a respect and just the idea of that we don't want to presume gender pronouns and all of that. And so I will stay on this hill as long as I understand that the grammar continues to be correct, which I do try to do. Obviously verbally, I sometimes make grammar ticks and mistakes, but I do believe I'm allowed to say they for a male or female author, and I'm going to stick by that. If I remember, I might use the proper pronoun, but if I can't think of it in that second as I'm filming, you're going to hear me say they, and it's just how it is. And finally, one of the biggest comments I got on videos, especially something like a book haul or a review video where I disclose that I got a certain book from a publisher for review, is that I get a general comment that says, oh sure, you get the books for free and then you expect us to pay for it, and something to that effect. And to that, I want to respond a few different ways. So first, I am never selling someone the book. There are no affiliate links for actual buying books on my channel in terms of if you go to Amazon or Walmart or Target or whatever the case is. So you are free to buy the books however you want or not buy the books. I'm very honest that when I don't receive books from publishers, I am almost always getting those books from the library. And part of the reason that I get books from publishers is that my library system has crazy long holds on new releases. So my goal as a reviewer is to review newer books so that I can give opinions on which ones are worth your time, your money. And again, I will encourage people to go to their library. I never say you have to buy this book. I think it's very important to support publishing, and I do put my dollars towards books whenever I can, but I also live within a tight budget when it comes to books, and I respect people who do the same thing. So you will hear me very clearly say on camera that I got this book from the library, or I did this library haul. I've done videos talking about different ways to save money on books, and so I recognize it's a privilege to receive free books from publishers, but I also will admit that I work for it. I have to put a lot of effort into videos, into posting social media things, and so forth to share around the book while I'm still being entirely authentic of stating whether or not I like the book. And if you follow my channel, you'll know that I can be pretty harsh on books that I receive for review. I don't like to treat them any differently than something I got from the library. If anything, I'm more likely to finish a bad book because I got it from the publisher, because I owe it to you all to tell you that the book sucks and is not worth your time. So if you're game for that, and hopefully that seems fair. So that is what I've done on my channel, and I think it works for me. I hope that doesn't come across as, again, overly privileged. I am aware of the opportunities I've gotten, and like I said, I've worked very hard to grow this channel over the years, and to the point that publishers will give me the time of day to consider me for review copies. So that's it for this video here. I'd love for you all to discuss in the comments, what do you think of the criticisms I've got, and what do you think of my responses? Even if you disagree, as long as you can keep it somewhat civil, I promise I will talk back. I do want to be open to criticism on my channel, and it's a little bit intimidating to open myself up like this on a video because, again, it's much easier for me just to talk about books and to talk about my personal life and personal identity as a curator. But if this was fun, I'd love to hear from you down below. So if you're new to my channel and for some reason want to subscribe based off of this video, go ahead and do so. I do normally read and review a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, and other dark things. If you want to help me out with this video, you can give it a big thumbs up. If you hate me, you can give it a big thumbs down. I see those engagements too. And if you want to drop a comment but don't know what to say, just drop something like an emoji, maybe a flame for some hot burning mess and hot takes. So if you want to hear from me again, definitely hit that little notification bell. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.